The film takes place in 2050. An environmental disaster has completely destroyed the world in which the movie opens. A survivor named Nova explores the desolate area and comes across a bird skeleton before being called back to base because of low oxygen levels. She tells Simon, an old guy in a wheelchair, back at base that they must travel back in time. Nova quickly gets ready to leave with her robot friend. After preparation. Through a wormhole that leads to the past, Nova launches her spacecraft from the orange-tinted, dust-choked Earth. As a result, Nova crashes into an unknown, dark forest. In 2025, as evening gets closer, a young boy named Narcisse sees him riding a quad bike through the forest. He immediately asks for help getting the unconscious Nova out of the collision site before anyone finds her. Some police officers see NAS, Nova, and the robot leave the site, despite their quick departure. When NAS moves them to an abandoned facility, Nova looks younger even though she is still unconscious. Detective Claire questions the cops about the crash and the escapees they saw at the same time. Claire follows this lead and goes to the nearest house, which is NAS. When he learns that NASA is not there, he advises her to check the old factory. When NAS gets back to the factory, Nova is already awake. Nova is taken aback when Claire shows up at the factory. She spots Nova's abandoned spacesuit and her stolen automobile leaving with a roar. Claire uses NASA's quad bike to travel to a military base after her automobile breaks down. She provides the military with their crashed spacecraft findings the following day. It's a perplexing discovery that they were able to link the fingerprints of the pilot to a 12-year-old girl named Nova. While driving, Nova asks what NASA intends to do with the funds. He talks about his desire to see his father again in South America. Their vehicle suddenly falls and starts to release smoke. Alter, an old trucker, stops and offers to assist them at his house. Given that roadside repairs are impractical, they meet his wife, Marianne, at his house. Marianne has dinner ready, Nova announces after the car is fixed. While eating, Marianne observes that Nova is dressed strangely. Anna's driver's license is missing. The couple decides to help them instead of the person who a news broadcast names as the kidnapper. Nova tells NAS that a police cruiser is approaching. Alton hides the stolen police cruiser in his garage while they run into the cornfields. The fugitives manage to get away when the stolen vehicle unexpectedly reverses into the police officer's line of sight. Claire questions the Nova of today at the same time. Claire is confused by her parents' insistence that she studied the night before. Upon examining Nova's chamber and discovering nothing unusual, she brings the family in for additional interrogation. Claire receives word from a scientist that Nova's fingerprints were discovered on the spaceship, raising the possibility of cloning. The news that Claire's automobile has been found reaches her. Claire heads straight to Alton's house with her squad. Claire confronts the couple about the stolen automobile when she arrives. An officer swiftly exposes Alton's lying by presenting Nazi clothing. This sets off a comprehensive search for the fugitives. Future Nova and NAS have arrived at the forest in the meantime. As soon as Nova notices a soldier, she quickly points her futuristic weapon at him, greatly slowing him down. The fugitives eventually reach a strongly guarded home in an attempt to evade capture. They enter covertly via a vent. They hear a meeting going on inside about plans for drilling near the North Pole. NAS is told to remain still by Nova while she addresses the meeting participants. Among them, she spots a younger Simon, and she asks to speak with him alone. Nova cautions them against digging the North Pole because of the possibility of releasing significant volumes of methane when Simon demands that she make her message known to the public. But Simon's father, an elderly guy, ignores her advice since he thinks there isn't much of a risk. After that, security escorts Nova outside. Nova sees Simon receiving criticism from his father for permitting kids to disrupt their gathering. Meanwhile, Claire is still taken aback by the soldiers' sluggishness. Afterwards, she receives a call from a security guard at the estate alerting her of the runaways' presence. At the same time, North and Nova's voyage approached the ocean. At this point, Nova tells NAS that she is a 37-year-old time traveler from the future who has rejuvenated herself. Claire watches the CCTV footage of the two escapees back at the estate. When she discovers that something has been placed behind Simon's car, she calls the scientist right away to find out if the current Nova is still being held captive. This is confirmed by the scientist, who also says that young Simon is being protected by two Novas. A SWAT team is sent by Claire to the billionaire's residence. At last, the two fugitives arrive at Simon's home, where he had recovered a future Nova, and NES. Entering the house through the living room where Simon is meditating, Nora tells Addie about their future acquaintance and gives her instructions to transmit a holographic message from Simon's future self. Behind closed doors, the SWAT team surrounds the house as young Simon watches the video. Even after seeing the message, Simon is unconvinced and assumes it is a ruse to blackmail him right before he calls the police. He takes Nova's revolver and points it in his direction. Simon. This causes Claire to follow the SWAT team inside the house. Claire detects gunfire. She quickly assesses Nova's condition after discovering her on the ground. It looks that AD deflected a bullet intended for Nova, causing the robot to explode. Jonas feels scared because of what happened with Nova. He makes a quick, stealthy getaway and arrives at Alton's house, where he tells the elderly man that Nova has been apprehended by the authorities. Gripped by guilt, Nos sobs uncontrollably. As soon as Alton notices his sadness, he gives him comfort. A short while later, Claire is by Nova's side when she awakens in a medical ward. Then, Claire asks Nova if there is anything that she can do to help. Claire is informed by Nova of her future assignment to foil Simon's ill-fated scheme. This prompts Claire, who runs to the base to ask the scientist if time travel is theoretically feasible. The scientist responds that it is. The scientist is repairing Addie when all of a sudden, Addie comes to life and runs off with the futuristic gun. Claire and the scientist try their best, but they are unable to capture the robot. Then Claire spots young Simon on the property. She tells him that Nova's claim that she is from the future is supported by the data they have gathered. Simon's father steps in before he can respond, which makes Simon write off Nova's worries as a result of his fixation with climate change. Abruptly, NAS spots ADD outdoors and quickly heads over to it. After running out of energy, the robot breaks down in a weaker state and tells NAS that Nova is inside an army base and that she needs assistance immediately. The robot terminates itself once more after sending its last message. With determination, NAS takes the futuristic rifle Addie was holding and goes directly to the location where Nova is being held. In order to help, Alton drives him to the checkpoint, where NAS is detained right away and interrogated. The colonel tries to talk about NASA's plans in the questioning area. But before they can accelerate, NAS swiftly pulls his gun and fires at the colonel and another soldier. The scientist is now adjusting Nova's spacesuit when he dashes over to her. NAS removes the spacesuit without endangering the researcher. Upon discovering Nova, he assists her in donning the spacesuit. NAS attempts to flee after lifting her. Nova has already been flown by NAS to her spacecraft at the Army installation. Inside the spacecraft, Nova thanks NAS for sparing her life. Reluctantly, NAS bids her farewell before leaving the vessel. Outside, he observes as the spacecraft soars high into the night sky. When Claire sees him, she chastises him for what he did, but NAS just keeps staring at the spaceship as it takes off. The spacecraft returns to the future, but the planet remains desolate since Nova's mission was unsuccessful. When her spaceship is found, Nova is quickly taken to a tiny container to rest. The young girl Nova transforms back into her adult form after taking a nap. She exits the tent to speak with Simon in the future. The elderly Simon apologizes and tells her that things have changed. A youngster arrives out of nowhere and calls Nova his mother, which confuses Nova's future. The child's father, NAS, then comes forward. The boy then notices a similar bird skeleton as Nova leads her through the dangerous wilderness. Because of the child's interest in birds, Nova comes to see how critical it is to change the timeline so that future generations can benefit. She accepts to go back in time for another trip, her resolve restored. But Nova wants to go back to the precise place she left NAS and the others. She also intends to speak with young Simon more directly. As a result, Nova goes back to where Claire and NAS are. Even though she was just gone for a minute, she asks if they felt like they missed her. NAS and Nova headed for the North Pole together. After arriving in the North Pole, they immediately change into their all-white attire and proceed to the location where Simon and his father are giving a speech to a group of people. Simon worries that Nova's influence will make the plan less likely to succeed during the speech, but his father is determined to drill to the North Pole. The spectators dispersed as they saw that the two kids had used their weapons to slow down the guards. Simon's father persists in trying to start the drilling machine in spite of Nova's advice not to carry out the terrible plan. Fortunately, Nova moves quickly, slowing the drill down with a shot to the stubborn old guy and the machinery. Overwhelmed, Simon continuously sobs and expresses regret for not having faith in Nova. When Nova and NAS notice his change of heart, they leave. Later, after dropping NAS off at Alton's house, Nova gives him a hug and a handshake. When NAS inquires as to whether or not they will get together again, Nova answers in the negative. Then Alton reappears with an unexpected gift: he has fixed ADD. After obtaining her ship, Nova goes back to the future. Now that he is friendly with the couple, NAS walks freely inside the extra room before noticing a detective's car pulling up behind the house. Afterwards, Claire queries NAS regarding the spacecraft that are starting to emerge everywhere, asking if they are all from the future. NAS admits that they are and says they plan to return if necessary. He also tells her that Nova has come back to her timeline permanently. Claire releases him and returns his quad bike to NASA, satisfied with their reaction. NAS notices an automobile as he gets on the bike and the display Nova in the rear seat. Knowing they'll get back together someday, Nova's automobile is followed by a happy NAS.